A day after the Alaska summit, outlines have emerged of the peace proposals discussed by Russia's Vladimir Putin and his US counterpart Donald Trump. Now, according to reports which cited official sources, Russia proposed relinquishing tiny pockets of occupied Ukraine, and in return, Kiev would cede swathes of its eastern land, which Moscow has not been able to capture. Well, Trump had confirmed in an interview with Fox News that he and Putin discussed land transfers along with security guarantees for Ukraine and had largely agreed on them. Sources said that under the proposed Russian deal, Kiev would fully withdraw from the eastern Donetsk and Luhansk regions in return for a Russian pledge to freeze the front lines in the southern regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia. Now, post the meeting with Putin, Trump briefed Zelensky and European leaders on his summit discussions, and Trump said that Ukraine should make a deal with Russia because Russia is very big and they're not.
Look, Russia's a very big power, and they're not. They're great soldiers, and they have great, but they also had the best equipment. They had our equipment, and I gave them javelins, if you remember, in my first term. In fact, there was a statement, I gave javelins. You remember this?
Now, Putin's offer ruled out a ceasefire until a comprehensive deal is reached, blocking a key demand of Zelensky, whose country is hit daily by Russian drones and ballistic missiles. Zelensky said that Russia's refusal to accept a ceasefire was complicating efforts to end the war. He also expressed skepticism about the future, pondering over the bigger question, which is how to get Russia to have the will to implement far greater peaceful coexistence with its neighbors for decades. Now, Zelensky is due to travel to Washington on Monday to discuss with Trump a possible settlement of the full-scale war. Reports say that European leaders are invited to come along with Zelensky. The French presidency, meanwhile, said that the leaders of Britain, France and Germany will host a video call on Sunday involving Kiev's allies in a coalition of the willing to discuss steps towards peace in Ukraine. Well, the question is, when would Trump meet Putin and Zelensky? Reports say that Trump told European leaders that he wants to arrange a trilateral summit as soon as August 22nd. Following his return from the US, Putin briefed senior Russian officials about the outcome of the summit and said that he respects the US administration's position, which wants the hostilities to stop as soon as possible, and added that they would like to move forward with settling all issues by peaceful means. He highlighted that the interaction with Trump covered all aspects, with a focus, of course, on achieving a fair resolution on the Ukraine crisis. There were discussions, he said, on the origins and causes of the crisis, adding that the Russian delegation had the chance to convey their position in a calm and detailed manner. Now, joining us on the broadcast is Scott Lucas. He's a professor of international politics at Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Thank you so much, Professor, for making time for us and joining us on the broadcast.
Thank you so much.
Now, Professor Lucas, a day after the Trump and Putin summit in Alaska, the signals don't look encouraging for Ukraine. Russia seems to have held firm on its stance and perhaps have even persuaded President Trump to shift his position. Now, with Trump talking about bypassing a ceasefire and moving straight to a permanent peace deal, how do you read these developments?
Well, as it stands right now, that's a good summary because, as many of us expected on Friday, Vladimir Putin manipulated Donald Trump to effectively become a spokesperson for Russia's demands. Let's be clear, first of all, this is not a land swap. There is no proposal for a land swap here. Russia is not proposing to withdraw from any territory that it holds. Instead, Russia is actually demanding territory that it does not occupy. In other words, it wants even more territory in the east of Ukraine by demanding all of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. They have put that demand now as the priority rather than the priority going into that meeting on Friday, which Donald Trump was going to put forward after meeting Zelensky or speaking with Zelensky and European leaders, which was a ceasefire, which makes sense. A ceasefire should be the first step. Then you can talk about the issues that are at hand. In addition, Putin scored a big win because you no longer hear Trump talking about toughened sanctions on Russia, which he was doing only just over a week ago. And those sanctions, of course, would also include Russia's largest customers, China and India. So, yeah, Vladimir Putin, in a way, put Donald Trump back into his pocket, at least for now. But that's not the end of the story, because we know that Vladimir Zelensky and probably a couple of European leaders, Finland's Alexander Stubb, maybe NATO head Mark Rutte are going to Washington tomorrow. And Trump notoriously listens to the last person in the room. So he could come out of that meeting with Zelensky and the Europeans tomorrow and come out with a different position and say, well, oh, maybe a ceasefire is the priority. Maybe we need to get back to that. Donald Trump is not a statesman. He's not a diplomat. He's a yo-yo. And the question here is who gets control of the yo-yo and for how long?
Absolutely. And Professor, that leads me to my next question now, with Zelensky due to travel to Washington tomorrow to discuss with Trump a possible settlement of the full-scale war. And now, according to the reports, European leaders are also invited to accompany Zelensky. Now, realistically speaking, what kind of outcome do you see emerging from these talks, and how are they going to set the tone for the trilateral, which can happen as soon as August 22nd, if we go by the reports?
Well, I just dismissed the talk about the trilateral on the 22nd. Because Vladimir Putin, up to this point, does not recognize Volodymyr Zelensky and his government as legitimate. He never has. That's part of the justification for the invasion. So Putin, if he doesn't recognize Zelensky as legitimate, won't sit down at the same table with him. More broadly, you can't have a settlement when Russia is effectively putting out ultimata for Ukraine's surrender. You know, how does Ukraine settle when Russia is saying, oh, we'll keep the territory we already have. You need to recognize that. And we're going to make you withdraw from territory that you control, and we'll take that as well. That's not a settlement. That's a demand for Ukraine's capitulation. So realistically, we are back in the position where we were at the start of this year with the Trump administration coming in, which is Russia's going to continue the invasion. It's going to continue the ground attacks, which are making very limited advances. It's going to continue the air attacks killing Ukraine civilians. And the question here is, as it was at the start of this year, is will the Trump administration negotiate with Russia and impose a settlement on Ukraine? And if Ukraine refuses that settlement, in other words, the Russia ultimatum to surrender, will the Trump administration again cut off military assistance and support for Kyiv?
Those are all fair points, Professor Lucas, but of course we'll have to wait for tomorrow and see what happens after the bilateral between Zelensky and Trump. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective with us.
Thanks to you and all your great viewers.